we can take this background, the values of each generation, and apply them to how we communicate, but we can also apply them to how we respond. We need to take into consideration each individual as well as their backgrounds in both how we speak and how we listen and how we choose to interact. Hey friends, my name is Gabby Rosalie, and this is the Crucial Conversations podcast, a platform dedicated to self-fulfillment and breaking the cycle of wasted potential. Using the tools of perspective, knowledge, wisdom, and awareness, I, with the help of qualified expert guests, share free insight and proven strategies that lead to all forms of success. If you are ready to start investing in yourself and living the life of your dreams, because I promise it is possible for all of us, you came to the right place. Together, we will help each other level up and have the crucial conversations necessary to do so. Hello, everyone. This is Gabby Rosalie, your host of the Crucial Conversations podcast. And I did not put an episode out last Monday. And quite honestly, I've been a little bit lackadaisical in producing episodes bi-weekly. And I've been going through a lot of shifts in my life in terms of living situation in the last couple of months. I've really been all over the board. I was in Costa Rica for almost 4 months at the beginning of this year. Then I was living on a sailboat for a month. And then I was all over the place this summer. For the last 2 months, I've been renovating a property in my family up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I was just visiting home, and now I am solo back up at my cabin. So I have been all over the place, and I've been having a lot of fun, but I've also been really focusing on my business and starting to create structure and treating it more like a job than a passion project. And I've had a lot of really amazing opportunities start rolling in, and I'm really, really excited because I can feel the momentum. And like I said, I feel like there's a big shift coming. And I am really excited, but it has been a lot. So I am here and I'm very excited for the topic of today's crucial conversation. We are going to be talking about communicating across different generations. So we're going to touch on the 4 generations that make up the workforce primarily at this point in 2024, which are baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. And we're going to talk a little bit about the background of each of those generations and how to cater your approach in order to be the most effective, understanding, and empathetic to each generation's different story, values, and also respecting their mode of communication that they are most comfortable with. And before we talk about any of this, this is something that I am really passionate about because I really do feel like communication is key to quite literally everything. Because there is verbal and nonverbal communication, but when we become masters of our words and our tonality, our approach, and our ability to employ emotional intelligence in our conversations, not only do we increase the degree of trust and vulnerability in our relationships, but we actually increase productivity, collaboration, innovation. And if you're running a business or you're employing these tactics in the workplace, you are going to increase your profits as well. There are so many different statistics that support this idea of conscious communication making happy employees and making happy pockets, happy clients. I mean, we increase creativity by 50% when we have positive company culture. Productivity increases by up to 23% when we have engaged employees, which is a direct correlation to positive company culture. And revenue has the opportunity to be increased 4 times over when we have engaged employees, a part of a positive company culture. So, everybody is their own human being, and I'm not saying that you need to bring flashcards to every conversation that you have. However, I do believe that a basic understanding of different individuals, and again, these generations are going to be generalizations in terms of the approach and the values that each hold, because like I said, every person is their own, but these generalizations do give us a basic understanding that will help us to adapt our communication style to develop the most understanding and therefore increase effectiveness in our professional and our personal relationships. So we are going to get started. The first generation that I want to talk about are the baby boomers. The people in this generation were born 1946 to 1964. And these are numbers that I derived from the Pew Research Center. So depending on different research centers where you look, there may be a little bit of variation in these years, but this is the most common bracket for baby boomers. So 1946 to 1964. And within this time frame, the reason we called it the baby boomer generation, or the reason we call it the baby boomer generation, is because 76 million kids were born during this time period. This was a time of expansiveness. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background that created the way that this generation grew up and directly influenced the way that they showed up in the workplace, in their relationships, and in their communication tactics. This was post-World War II. Life in America. Okay. Oh, again, this is about American generations. I just want to reiterate that because yes, there are a lot of cultural differences when we look at background and values and everything like that. But for Americans born between 1946 and 1964, this was an expansive generation, and there was a lot of economic growth, and there was a newfound stability that the previous generation, who we termed the silent generation, did not have. So this confidence that the baby boomers grew up with helped to translate into the way that they confidently communicate. Baby boomers were very, very hardworking. And although they had the stability and the expansiveness, it wasn't like a safety net. It was like a motivation for them to go out and work hard. They were also the last of the covenant generation. And when I say covenant generation, what I mean by that is they had the promise, oftentimes from their very first employers, that they would be carried through to retirement. They were the last of the generation that had this promise from early employers that they would take care of them throughout the duration of their career. So with this being said, baby boomers really valued tradition. They valued hierarchy, and they put a lot of faith in authority figures. So baby boomers really value clear social roles, and they value that structure because, again, it kind of makes them feel stable and like they are respecting tradition. So they're hardworking and they're disciplined, and they oftentimes have that same kind of mentality when they're dealing with their employers. So respect and loyalty to their employers was highly valued. And oftentimes, questions were deferred to authority figures and people of seniority. So nowadays we see millennials and even Gen Zers that are becoming managers, whereas previously it was really based on seniority and tenure with the company. So when you're talking with a baby boomer, it is very important to recognize the background that they grew up in and that they value the tradition, they value the stability, and that they were expansive and hardworking. So when you're approaching a baby boomer, make sure that you are using titles and you are maintaining a degree of professionalism that signifies your respect. To take that respect a bit further, recognize that baby boomers have been around longer than any generation after them. Naturally. It's the sequence of time, right? So baby boomers have a lot of experience and knowledge and wisdom. So when you're talking to folks that were born between 1946 and 1964, recognize that they have a lot of life experience and we have a lot to learn from them. They also appreciate this respect and recognition of their experience and knowledge. So if you're a part of a younger generation, if you're a millennial, don't go in there acting like you know everything and that the way baby boomers have done things for their entire lives is simply wrong because you found a new way to do it. What works for you may not work for them, but there is value in a traditional approach. So respect and recognize that. And when you're speaking with a baby boomer, make sure that you are employing confident body language and facial expressions. Because again, they came from an expansive, hardworking background. And so they appreciate eye contact and assertive communication, both verbally and non-verbally. And when you are delivering feedback to a baby boomer, make sure that you are still recognizing their experience and knowledge, but that you are able to deliver respectful and actionable feedback. They're hard workers, so they want to know what to do. They appreciate solution-based feedback. And when we're talking about mode of communication in terms of actual modality, in-person, face-to-face communication is favored by most baby boomers. They are comfortable with phone call, but remember, they did not grow up with technology. Millennials who grew up with technology and Gen Zers who are the real digital natives, that's a whole different story. Baby boomers did not grow up with the same degree of technology that we have nowadays. So respect that and appreciate their value in face-to-face communication. And make sure that if you're sending an email, if you're sending out a project outline, that you're providing detail and information in a structured manner. They want it to be clear and they want it to be structured. Okay, so make sure that you are not sending a jumbled up text message to a baby boomer if you're talking about meeting tomorrow morning. They would appreciate some notice, some structure, and information. So make sure that you're valuing that. Now we're going to talk about Gen X. So Gen Xers, they are kind of the sandwich generation. In fact, they're termed the sandwich generation because oftentimes we forget about Gen X. We talk a lot about boomers, we talk a lot about millennials, and we talk a lot about Gen Z nowadays, but oftentimes we forget about Gen X. Generation X is the people that were born between 1965 and 1980, and they make up 31% of the workforce. I don't think I mentioned that about baby boomers, but as of 2024, according to the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, baby boomers make up 18% of the workforce. So Gen X, 31% of the workforce, born between 1965 and 1980. Here's the difference between Gen X and baby boomers. Compared to 76 million boomers, Gen X had 46 million kids born between 1965 and 1980. So we are seeing the pendulum swing. Boomers were born in a very expansive and confident time. Gen X swings the other way and really is operating under this cautionary type approach to career, to work, to politics and authority figures and the whole 9 yards. Because think about what was going on between 1965 and 1980. This was the introduction of the birth control pill, the AIDS epidemic, Roe v. Wade in 1973, the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, like they had a lot going on that not only caused them to question authority figures, but also put a lot of pressure on navigating through societal and political, really trials and tribulations that they didn't have a whole lot of control over. And here's the thing about Gen Xers, they have a lot of responsibility at this present point in their lives, which is now beginning to expand over into millennials. But a lot of Gen Xers have both parents that are relying on them, sometimes emotionally and financially, as well as children under the age of 21 that are relying on them emotionally and financially. So they've got a lot on their plates. And Generation X was also the first generation to grow up in dual income households. So both the men and the women of the household were working. And so this created a lot of latchkey kids. So Gen X was hyper independent because they had to be. So they became resourceful and self-sufficient. But because of economic instability and questioning authority figures, they also developed a lot of skepticism. And I mean, they've been through 4 recessions in their lifetime. So a lot of economic instability as well really just caused them to kind of question and also be very practical and tactical about their resources and asserting themselves as independent and self-sufficient. So Gen Xers really value realism. When you're talking to a Gen Xer, do not beat around the bush. They want real. When we're talking about their skepticism and their questioning authority figures, if you're beating around the bush, they are going to know and they're not going to like it. They want you to be direct and straightforward, and they want you to be real. And like I said, they value independence and self-sufficiency, which means that in their work, they appreciate autonomy. So we don't want to micromanage Gen X. We just don't want to micromanage them. They are fully responsible. They're hardworking as ever. But you have to let them do their jobs. You have to trust them to do their jobs. And remember, in this age of latchkey kids, even when they got home from after school care and their parents kind of asked what they did all day, they weren't the ones to open up and talk all about it. They kept to themselves a lot. So don't micromanage a Gen Xer, and also don't expect a Gen Xer to open up and talk to you about their feelings, because it's probably not going to happen. Again, every individual is very different. Every individual is different. They all have their own stories. And again, these are generalizations. But for the most part, Gen Xers are very independent and self-sufficient. They also value work-life balance. So baby boomers were the last of the covenant generation. Gen X was the first generation to, instead of accepting that promotion that required you to move your family across the country, said, hey, I'll get back to you. Let me just make sure that this aligns with my family, my wife, what I want for my kids, what I want for my life outside of work. So they value work-life balance, and they also value security. They had a lot of instability growing up, so they are very concerned with security. So keep that in mind when you're approaching a conversation with a Gen Xer. Be concise and professional. Don't beat around the bush. No fluff. Provide solutions and results-focused feedback, and make sure that feedback is frequent. They don't want to be left out of the loop. And if you have the opportunity, share responsibilities with Gen X. You can detail clear individual contributions, let them go off, do their work, but then come together and collaborate. Don't put everything on the plate of a Gen Xer. They've got a lot going on. They appreciate their independence, but they don't want to do everything by themselves. They want to do what they're responsible for, come back, and be a part of the greater whole. So share responsibilities if you have the chance, and avoid micromanaging a Gen Xer. Trust them to do their job. If they are not doing it correctly, make sure that you enact a conscious conversation that recognizes what they've been through, where they're coming from, and what they value. As for mode of conversation, for important matters, bring them in face-to-face. They are, however, comfortable with phone and email. The last thing you're probably going to want to use with a Gen Xer, and a boomer for that matter as well, is excessive social media. They're not, they may have become adept to it, but growing up, they didn't have it. So try to respect where they came from and communicate with them in forms that they are comfortable if you have the opportunity. All right, the next generation, Millennials. Millennials were born 1981 to 1996, and they make up 36% of the workforce. And again, we see the pendulum swing once again. Boomers were confident, Gen X was cautious, and millennials are back in the driver's seat of expansive confidence. Oftentimes, millennials are referred to as the cafeteria kids. And basically what that means is that they got to choose. They got to choose. They had a lot of choices and could literally walk into life, walk into the workplace in many instances, and choose what it was they wanted and what it was they do not want. They had a lot of technological advancement. They grew up with technology. So although I wouldn't consider them natives like I do Gen Z, they did grow up with rapid technological advancement. There were a lot of economic booms in the times of millennials, as well as globalization. So we saw the .com boom during millennials, and we saw not only the technology expanding, changing the way of life, but also the rapid expansion of globalization and economy in this time. So again, that expansive and abundant nature of life that felt like it was at their fingertips, that really, really shaped the way that millennials show up in the workplace nowadays. Now, they're children of dialogue. So Gen Xers, who are the latchkey kids and didn't grow up with this degree of companionship and rapport with their parents in their families, they wanted to change that for their kids. So when they have conversations with their kiddos, they're asking them how their day was, and millennials are going to open up and they're going to likely overshare. Millennials really, really value self-expression. And so they want to be able to assert their opinions. Think about MySpace and Facebook. Millennials were the first generation to start curating an online presence. So their self-expression is huge. A lot of millennials, tattoos became a lot more popular. Asserting themselves in the workplace and their opinions became a lot more popular. And they appreciate the flexibility. So make sure that if you are talking to a millennial, that you recognize that they also value this work-life balance. They value mentorship as well. So when you're giving feedback to a millennial, make sure that you are having conversations instead of lectures. Teach with questions when you have the opportunity to, because they want to feel like they are being mentored, not lectured. They sometimes overlap, but make sure that you are engaging millennials in conversation as much as possible. Sometimes you're going to have to tell them straight, here's what you got to do. You got to do it. Awesome. But if you have the opportunity, allow them to offer their opinions, because it's going to make them feel seen, heard, and appreciated in ways that are going to actually create more productivity, more innovativeness, more creativity for them when they're able to express themselves, because it's what they're used to. It's what they enjoy, what makes them feel good. When you're talking to a millennial, also be informal and empathetic. They really value relatability. So make sure that you are not placing yourself on a pedestal when you're talking to a millennial. Allow them the opportunity to relate to you and be empathetic. Offer real-time feedback and make sure it's frequent. They like frequency and concise, like brief meetings. So if you're going to call a meeting that's only like an hour, don't make it 3 hours and go into every single possible detail. It's not necessary. Make them more frequent and make them brief if you're meeting with a millennial. As for mode of conversation, millennials appreciate instant feedback. So text, direct message, email, and they also like digital and collaborative platforms. So millennials really like collaboration as well. Like they want to work together with a team. Of course, they want to contribute in purpose, but they want to collaborate. They value the conversation. They value the mentorship. So allow them to collaborate and utilize a modality that enables collaborative nature. Zoom, Asana, other project management tools. Millennials love it. And then for important matters, meet in person. Nobody wants to hear that they're being laid off over text, right? So important matters, meet in person. All right, last generation that is currently in the workforce, the youngest generation in the workforce, Gen Z. Born 1997 to 2012, they make up 15% of the workforce. And I keep referencing this pendulum swinging from confidence to cautiousness. And millennials grew up confident. Gen Z is swinging back toward a cautionary nature. And Gen Z gets a lot of flack for being like really short attention spans, obsessed with technology. But here's the thing, hot take, we need to stop treating addiction to phone, social media, etc., like anything other than addiction as what it is. When we look at alcoholism, when we look at drug abuse and drug addiction, we're not laughing or making fun of the people who fall victim to those kinds of things. Social media and being addicted to your phone is the same way. Okay, period. That's hot take. But anyways, I'm a Gen Zer, so I'm gonna get real into this. I'm not gonna lie. Gen Z grew up with a lot going on. And I mean a lot going on. When we think about what was going on, Gen Zers are the homelanders, okay? There's terrorism, there's 9/11, there's racial unrest. Gen Z is coping and hoping. There is a lot of angst, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of anxiety, and they're digital natives, but unfortunately, this rapid expansion of technology, instant gratification, and publicizing everything online creates this constant comparison that oftentimes leaves Gen Zers feeling inadequate, depressed, anxious, and lost. So technology was not a choice. Okay, let's just put it out there. It wasn't a choice. You had to use it, and growing up, it just was the way of life. So with that being said, technology enhanced direct and entertaining communication. So Gen Z values that kind of communication. They have a lot of information coming at them from all directions, oftentimes in 140 characters or less. So make sure that when you are approaching a Gen Zer, you recognize their ability to take in information, but also their inability to maintain the attention span for as long as maybe a Gen Xer or a boomer. Okay, it's just a different world that we grew up in. So instantaneous communication and short form content is the calibrated baseline for Gen Zers. Again, they're living in an on-demand world. I'm living in an on-demand world. We're all living in an on-demand world, but Gen Zers know no different. Okay, so instant gratification is huge. Make sure that you don't have to beat around the bush and tiptoe or like walk on eggshells with a Gen Zer and be like, oh my God, what are they gonna do if I have a 90-minute meeting? Are they gonna be able to pay attention for the whole time? Yes, a Gen Zer needs to take responsibility for the position that they play in the workforce. However, if you have the opportunity to recognize that you're talking with a Gen Zer and they may have a little bit of a shorter attention span, keep things concise if you have the opportunity to. Now, Gen Z also has a lot of increased autonomy and freedom in terms of non-traditional career paths. So they also value self-expression, and this is the generation that has begun to actually monetize passions more than any other generation before. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit floating around in Gen Z, and a big part of that is a result of the economic instability that they saw their parents going through. We saw the 2008 great crazy recession. And it's funny how many Gen Zers will actually reference that when asked about growing up. So the 2008 financial crisis actually shaped the way that a lot of Gen Zers think about finances and about economy. So this desire to monetize passions and interests and potentially even hobbies is actually a desire to create stability as well as fulfillment. So once again, Gen Z, a lot of technology, a lot of instant gratification, but also a lot of opportunity because of the technology. So they have a lot of freedom. Make sure that you recognize that they value this freedom. And when you are approaching a conversation with a Gen Zer, again, be open to technology, keep your messages short and concise, and make sure that you're being conversational and authentic. Gen Z really values inclusivity and empathy and diversity as well. So be real. Be real. Gen Zers want to be able to relate to you. Most Gen Zers prefer to have millennial managers because both of the generations value relatability and show up with authenticity. But that does not mean that baby boomers and Gen Xers can't have good relationships with millennials and Gen Zers. It just means that we have to ground ourselves in a connection to who we are as human beings and recognize that same human being in one another. Again, the point of this conversation is just to give a basic understanding of the different generalizations of the generations. Okay, so treat everybody like a human being, knowing that we all came from different backgrounds, and knowing what those backgrounds were and the values that each generation holds will help you to adapt conversations accordingly. So the last thing that I will say about Gen Z is the mode of communication. Visual communication and digital platforms are highly preferable to Gen Zers. So use Zoom, use Google Meet, use FaceTime. If they can take a meeting out and about, that is preferable to them. Now, you have to find a balance between engagement and flexibility in the workforce, but instant and direct visual communication is key. Texting, direct messaging, even social media, short emails when we're talking to Gen Zers. A baby boomer might prefer a 2-page PDF attached to an email talking about the details for an upcoming meeting. A Gen Zer might just prefer a time and a place and say, all right, come prepared with X, Y, and Z in a bulleted list, and it's short, it's concise, awesome, we're good to go. I'll see you tomorrow. So just make sure you know who you're talking to. And again, the digital platforms and the virtual communication allows for that flexibility for Gen Zers as well. Before we conclude this crucial conversation, the last thing that I will say is that you have to know who you're talking to, but you also have to know who is talking to you. So we can take this background, the values of each generation, and apply them to how we communicate, but we can also apply them to how we respond. We need to take into consideration each individual as well as their backgrounds in both how we speak and how we listen and how we choose to interact. So again, don't take flashcards to your conversations. Ask questions and get curious. That is the key here. If we are curious about one another and our differing backgrounds, we are much more likely to go into a conversation seeking to understand versus seeking to assert ourselves in our own opinions or to be right or to tell somebody to do something without any pushback. If we're curious and we recognize the human being in one another, we have a much deeper opportunity to build relationship and understanding, which also increases productivity, engagement, and profit. It is a very, very interesting cycle. The more that we can integrate who we are as human beings into who we are as employees and who we are as team members and teams in the workforce, the more successful we are and the healthier we are and the happier we are in the workplace and out of the workplace. So it is really a holistic approach to collaboration, to team dynamics when we begin to understand each individual, but also bridge that with the generalizations of the background and the values that each generation may hold. With all of that being said, I hope that you guys gathered some useful information about the different generations today, and you can start to bring about some of this knowledge in the conversations that you have, because I think it is so important to have different friends of different ages. It is so valuable to have friends that are older than you. It is so valuable to have friends that are younger than you. And no generation is better than the next. We are our own human beings as well as our own generations. So having diversity across gender, across generation, across race, across anything is so important, because the more perspectives that we welcome, the more holistic approach we are able to take, rooted in deep understanding of one another and the world around us. So encourage these conversations and get curious about one another, and recognize that we're all coming from a set of different backgrounds with different values. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time on the Crucial Conversations podcast. Hey y'all, before you head out, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode, and most importantly, thank you for making the conscious decision to invest in yourself and expand your mind. By doing so, you are helping to elevate us all to live better lives. By showing up and emulating the things that you learned in today's crucial conversation, you are inspiring those around you. If you want to continue this domino effect, share this episode with someone that you want to help to unlock their maximum potential. And connect with me on Instagram at @GabbyRosleyCo to share your valuable feedback and offer recommendations for what you'd like to hear in future episodes. I love you all. Keep shining your unique lights, and I will see you next time on the Crucial Conversations podcast.